Extra Dimensional is releasing on April the 16th and is a very ambitious indie VR title. On their website, the developers are promising to deliver an unforgettable VR experience that's a feast for the senses, offering breathtaking visual fidelity, an orchestral soundtrack, revolutionary physics, emotional storytelling, and power progression that all comes together to deliver something new and extraordinary for virtual reality in 2026. After reading this, I thought, wow, that is quite the seller's pitch. But after watching the credits roll on Extra Dimensional myself, just like Bootstrap Island, this is yet another 2026 VR game from an unknown VR developer to exceed my expectations. It really does have some gorgeous graphics and some great set pieces with animations that felt well above what a four-man indie dev team is capable of. The weapons even have good physics, believable weight, and one of them has a cool little animation every time you pull it off your shoulder. They have also delivered a very compelling story of a power fantasy with a father trying to save his daughter. And it also has pretty decent voice acting. And there's some really good puzzles. Classic spiky traps triggered by stepping on the wrong stone on the floor that makes you feel like you're in an Indiana Jones movie. And these puzzles are never really difficult, but they are satisfying to overcome. The orchestral soundtrack I mentioned earlier increases the level of this game's quality, and it never outstays its welcome. Plus, Extra Dimensional offers a decent gameplay length of 6 to 7 hours. As an intro to a review, this is already sounding like VR's Game of the Year, because everything I've said so far is actually true. There was way too many moments I found myself genuinely shocked how good this is, but unfortunately there's also plenty of not good moments to counterbalance all of this wonderful stuff that I've been saying so far. We have some negatives that I obviously need to discuss, which is unfortunate, and we'll get into those as the review goes on. So let's break this review up into the story, the graphics, the negatives, and then my final thoughts. You play a warehouse worker called Max Ventura, who gets sucked into another dimension while at work along with his daughter, and upon his arrival into this other dimension, he is informed that he is the chosen one, and legend dictates he is here to save the world of Erath. It's like Earth, but it's spelt incorrectly. You soon get equipped with some cool weapons and spells powered by your daughter's iPhone that ends up being embedded on your left hand, and then you set off on your adventure to save the world and your daughter. There is much more to this story, but obviously I don't want to spoil it, and it's not necessarily a super original tale, but it's like a combination of many 90s hero fantasy movies, which I really enjoyed. There's 30 chapters with no set gameplay length to any of them, and some of these do seem a little bit unnecessary. One of them, for example, only lasted 47 seconds and really only acted as a loading screen, as another chapter lasted 27 minutes, but the loading times are thankfully very short. There's tons of notes hanging around, which I actually enjoyed reading, letting you know what has happened before you got here. And there's plenty of puzzles, and for me, Extra Dimensional is predominantly an adventure puzzle game. There is, however, plenty of action with a variety of monsters to kill and some really good mechanics that genuinely surprised me along the way. Time after time, I was left thinking how cool certain parts of this game was to experience, and I actually might replay it once some improvements have been made. I also died a lot during this adventure due to mostly trial and error, but it's hard to share these moments without spoilers. But one of them was being chased by this giant monster, and I had to drop a giant gate on his head to get past him. And this particular moment required perfect timing, and there's some genuinely cool puzzles that force you to read the notes to figure out how to get around them, and using some of the abilities you unlock using your Power Glove or Q-Smart system. The graphics, I'm sure you've already figured out, are surprisingly good, and everything has good solid physics, making you feel part of the world. You have to collect items from the real world left in Megazone boxes from the warehouse you work in, and these are filled with alternative versions of Blu-rays from famous films, TV shows, fizzy drinks, and chocolate bars. You can drink the fizzy drinks and eat the chocolate bars for health, but you don't really need to do this very often. The phone on your hand, as I said, which is called the Q-Smart system, has the ability to absorb these items, and you need to do this to unlock extra abilities, ranging from telekinesis, which is the first power you unlock because you'll need it the most throughout the whole journey, and then you eventually unlock fire, lightning, and ice. The phone is powered by AA batteries you find lying around, and you can store up to a maximum of 4 batteries on your tool belt. And I want to take a moment to admire the care and quality the devs have put into this game. The phone screen on your hand genuinely has depth. The absorption animation looks fantastic and beautiful, the spells look brilliant, and the battery changing animation is super cool too. It's these little things that I really admire. The weapons also look superb and even have a very cool swinging sound with believable weight. and the levels are varied, definitely more of a magical dungeon-based theme. And they also have an Indiana Jones temple vibe, which I mentioned earlier, with plenty of traps and spikes to kill you if you don't pay attention and you end up making the wrong choice. And I'm pleased to say the environments are also varied enough that this game never gets visually boring, and the lighting looks gorgeous throughout. You don't have a body, unfortunately, instead you just have arms, and these arms are super skinny, making your hands seem surprisingly large. But the hands react pretty well to the environment but not each other, and you get some nice moving physics versus the solid, almost fake plastic hands we get in a lot of VR games. Now onto some of the negatives. One of these negatives made a puzzle literally impassable. I spent ages trying to figure out how to progress, but in the end I had to message the developer only for him to tell me that the situation I'm in is impossible to get through, and I had to reload a previous checkpoint due to missing an item. And that's a massive no-no in game development. You can't knowingly design a dead end in your game. On your journey, you'll collect glowing diamond keys. You have 2 inventory slots on your belt, and that's where you can store these keys and many other items. And after collecting these keys, you normally use them shortly afterwards. But this game has an issue where some items, like the keys, can be carried indefinitely, and they don't always need to be used, and this can lead to some confusion. You might, for example, find a sword, but there's no in-game stats or reasons why you need to keep the sword or swap it for something else. There's also tools you find, like right at the start of the game you have a torch, which to me seems a very important item that you should keep. Or there's a massive wrench, which you start to use quite regularly for a couple of chapters, and then without warning you will never need to use this item again, but you end up carrying it because there is a chance you might need it. And as I said, these items all take up one of your 4 inventory slots. So for me, this game has all the signs of internal testing problems, because issues like this aren't an issue if you already know what to do, and more importantly, what's coming up next in the game. When you play any game that involves puzzles, you learn the language of the game, the recipe of what the developer expects of the player. And this is where we get my first red flag, and it's actually a persistent issue throughout the game. Another negative, which is really unfortunate because it does hold this game back from being something truly special and unmissable, and that's the combat. In all honesty, the combat is incredibly lame and it's very unchallenging, which is such a shame because the weapons and the magic are so cool to see and use. One good hit to an NPC and they end up just rolling around on the floor, leaving them open and unable to defend themselves. And this makes the combat very unrewarding and a bit of a joke. There is also some creatures like spiders, which I personally hated because they look very scary and they jump at you, and there's also some annoying flying insects. But overall, nothing in this game is really challenging when we're talking about the combat. Even the boss fights are incredibly easy, and one of these encounters actually had a lot of hype, leading up to a moment you met face to face with the ultimate bad guy, only to be met with a nothing burger at the end, which is why the combat is definitely the weakest part of Extra Dimensional. The swimming, which also looks great and I was quite excited to experience it, is easily the worst swimming in VR I've ever come across, so you end up using teleport instead to get through these certain watery caves, and it just feels very weird in VR. The voice work, though mostly good, is solid and it has some funny lines, but the main character's voice seems to change from being American to also then having a heavy Russian or Polish accent, making it sound like the voice work was done by 2 very different people at varying times throughout the game. The weapons, when stored on your back, regularly sound like they are clashing together. The menu sliders aren't very responsive. Using DLSS adds a permanent blur regardless of what choice you make in regards to performance or quality. And as I mentioned earlier, some in-game puzzles are impassable through no fault of the player. All of those frustrations aside, I really enjoyed this adventure. It's definitely got some indie elements though, like poor animations for some of the characters and some of the creatures, but it's also got sections and presentation that I genuinely thought was brilliant. Overall, I highly recommend this game to anyone who owns PCVR, on the understanding this is an indie game made by a team that appears to be trying their very best to bring a very cool adventure to VR. This game is coming on April the 16th, and the developers have already mentioned it might be coming to PSVR too. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you ever so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.